Wow, the global cyber war is ramping up around the world, as is the World War. Moneris, Canada's largest electronic payment gateway system, had a nationwide outage on Friday, causing consumer chaos across the entire country. In some cases, people had to abandon their shopping carts, not only in the real world, but online as well, because you can't do online banking. You couldn't do e-commerce because Moneris is usually the backbone of it all that facilitates those transactions. You couldn't use your debit card in places. Will people learn to start carrying more cash because they're now getting the sense of how vulnerable the grid is, how vulnerable all of this technology actually is? Probably not. Maybe for a day, but then they're sure to forget as a few weeks go by. But guys, the amount of major cyber attacks in just the past few weeks, and it's not like we're noticing them more. It's not a confirmation bias thing. There just simply is more. And it makes me think that all nations are now starting to unload their arsenals of things, and this is exactly what you would do in the run-up. We are now on pace, right when this political season peaks in 2024, we may well see a leave the world behind situation as a result of some massive cyber attack. Now, if you missed the video we did yesterday with the cybersecurity expert, you're going to want to stay tuned for part 2, because that was just the appetizer, okay? The main course of that presentation, the hour-and-a-half long, densely packed crash course in cyber security, everything related to the threats for nation states, World War III, hybrid war, how the critical infrastructure might be compromised, is in part 2. So you're going to want to stick with us for that. But there's plenty of other news to discuss here, in addition to going into more depth about this Moneris power outage, which was major. And of course, they will never admit it was a cyber attack if they do not have to. It's the ones that they don't admit are the ones that are most concerning. Because ransomware, okay, you know, people are trying to get money. An attack that was just a nation state trying to create a disruption, and they deployed the resources in order to do a hack like that, those are the hacks that are very, very concerning, because those are the ones just done to create chaos, okay? Now, in other news, the Mediterranean is now getting ready to heat up. The Iraqi resistance is now joining in the fight. Apparently, they've attacked a gas rig, an Israeli gas rig, off the coast in the Mediterranean. So now you not only have the Houthis, who are threatening to do some sort of unprecedented surprise attack in the next 24 hours. I don't know how much of a surprise it will be if you announce it. But if they attack an American warship, that's when this whole thing gets crazy, okay? Even though right now the coalition of warships is apparently in command and control disarray. They don't want to be taking orders from the Americans unless it's under the auspices of Nato. But all of the coalitional warships are still there. They're just not under a centralized command. So really, they're just there to respond to distress calls at this point in time. And that's not going to be enough peace of mind for a lot of warships. This is a very big region. There's a lot of ships, and it takes a lot of ships to police a region of this size, okay? We have the Russians and the Americans on incredibly thin ice. Now, what's going on that front is the Americans are getting ready to push forward some sort of asset seizure of the Russians' finances, $300 billion worth of finances. And the Russians are saying that they're going to recall any diplomatic mission in the United States if this happens. They're closing down the embassies, they're bringing all the diplomats home, and that's when you know things get incredibly dangerous. Once you don't have diplomacy in a country, immediately that country is just going to be a no-go zone, and that's when the prospect for conflict increases markedly. Okay, and now all of this is happening around the same time that the F-16s are expected to arrive inside the country, even though, as we told you a month and a half ago, I think that they got there around the time when we said that they got there, which was a month and a half ago, when our sources said they did. This would make more sense. Why would you advertise the exact day that you were going to do something? It would be incredibly antithetical to everything which is laid out in The Art of War, but it appears as though that's what they're doing anyways on pretty much every front. We're making every mistake in the book, according to The Art of War, according to a friend of mine anyways. So And it's true, everything that we, advertising the counteroffensive, all of this broadcasting, what we're doing, is this just for the purpose of performative philanthropy for a country to say, look, like the Dutch today saying we're sending 18 F-16s before the end of the year? Why would you ever announce that? Now, the problem is that the Russians are concerned, well, where are these planes going to be launched from? If they're being launched from NATO airstrips, then we are going to target those airstrips. Would be immediate Article 5 if that were to happen. Now, it could be that the Russians are feeling ballsy and brazen enough that they just might do it at this point. They just might actually follow through with that red line, although I wouldn't hold my breath, because we've seen many red lines overstepped and the Russians haven't acted in haste. They haven't reacted. They've responded in more strategic sorts of ways. So what we are seeing right now developing is these F-16s, which could potentially carry nuclear weapons, which have always been the primary concern of the Russians. Although I think the Russians know that the Americans likely wouldn't do something so crazy, but they have to presume from a strictly technical military standpoint that they very well may carry nuclear weapons. And so if it is the case that the Ukrainian airfields are destroyed or are defunct or are not able to accommodate these F-16s, I mean, you would think that was the case, or maybe they have some underground thing that they've built for all we know. But if it is the case that they cannot accommodate, we have to presume that these F-16s are going to be running sorties from NATO countries into Ukrainian airspace. So they come in under the radar over the border. I'm not I've never been in the Air Force. I don't know anything about it, so I don't even know if that's possible. I don't know all the technical details of that. I'm sure some of you guys have a great amount of knowledge on that subject area. But I would presume that there's ways that they could fly under the radar into the country once they're in Ukrainian airspace. Of course, they're going to want to remain undetected as long as possible to avoid those S-400 and S-300 systems and Russia's integrated air defense as a whole. But we're going to see if the Swiss Army knife of the skies, as they call it, is going to have any noticeable effect on the battlefield. Many people are still counting the Ukrainians out. I still say, in the very least, it's a stalemate. Yes, the counteroffensive has now admittedly failed by the mainstream media, or even admitting that, but the ATACMS are still doing damage. The HIMARS are still doing damage. They're still, I think today, they claim anyways, to have taken out 3 Su-34 fighter jets. That's a huge loss for the Russians for just one day. And we're seeing whole columns of Russian tanks continuously destroyed day after day, much alike Ukrainians. But, we got to remember, it's still their home turf. They have home field advantage. They have defender advantage. There's now 600,000 Ukrainian troops. They're trying to mobilize another 500,000. Zelensky today is trying to push through another law which is going to force any of the Ukrainian diaspora who fled the country that they are going to have to report to the nearest embassy or wherever country they are to come back home and die for NATO, organization which won't even allow them in. So a lot of countries and Ukrainians, of course, who are in those countries aren't going to really seek to enforce that at all either, but they might. It's hard to say. But there's some rumors that there was a plane that went to Washington, a Russian plane that went there, and I believe it had the call sign. What was its call sign? It was a Russian Special Flight Squadron. It was an Ilyushin plane, so it was definitely, heavy-duty government doomsday plane type stuff. And apparently, some of the rumors are that a Russian delegation went to Washington in order to broker a peace deal with the Americans, which is completely, I cannot even see how that would be remotely feasible. Number one, the Russians would never trust the Americans at this point in time. How could they ever trust us? I would think that this is likely more of rotating out, like a run-of-the-mill rotation of your diplomats at various embassies. It could be that I would say it's even more possible at this point in time that they're pulling diplomats out, that they're reducing the footprint of their diplomatic mission in Washington. So I'm not convinced by all of these rumors and hearsay that this is to initiate some sort of peace process deal. It just doesn't reflect the reality of the situation. for reasons that I've discussed at length. Among them would be primarily, it would just demonstrate an incredible amount of weakness for the United States to negotiate with anybody at this point. Because you have to remember, one of the primary reasons why the United States has the strength that it does is because it's been able to intimidate, right, with our very powerful Navy and their ability to project power. And it's not up until recently that countries have started to, find chinks in the armor, find weaknesses in the fence, and start to push back against what some people perceive to be the global bully. Now, there's different ways of looking at it. You could look at the U.S. military as being the primary stabilizing force that has been policing and bringing stability to the seaways of the world, sea corridors of the world. Somebody has to make sure that commercial vessels can go from one place to another safely. That's why the global superpower needs to have a massive navy in order to enforce all of that. But now the Houthis are pushing back. All the militias are starting to push back. And of course, the Russians are going to do what they want. The North Koreans are getting pretty rowdy. The Venezuelans are starting to understand their worth. The Chinese, of course, are the biggest elephant in the room. So this problem is getting wildly out of control. Now, before I forget, speaking about the Chinese, a major story that didn't get a whole lot of attention, but this is mainstream news, relayed by Yahoo News. The original story was posted on the South China Post, which is, for the most part, a reputable news organization, minus the propaganda slant towards Western ideas. China's top-secret spaceplane dubbed Shenlong released 6 mysterious objects after reaching the Earth's orbit for the 3rd time in 3 years, and it's now sending strong signals over North America. Now, an expert astronomer and satellite tracker Scott Tilley has been closely tracking the objects, examining the signals they've been emitting, and as he told the South China Morning Post, they appear to be sending the strongest signals while passing over North America. Now, what is this all about? He says, I'm seeing a pattern in its radio emissions. While over at me, it appears to favor low elevation western passes, he told the newspaper. This could indicate a clandestine ground station on the west coast of North America or on a ship off the coast that it's communicating with. Now, what are the implications of this for our strategic command? That's going to be the main question. Is this some kind of electronic warfare that is being run here? Is this some sort of jamming exercise where they're trying to see if they can either jam signals from NORAD and that would be, of course, related to our ability to launch nuclear weapons? Or is this more ado with them wanting to test out whether they could potentially trigger the detonation of something which was being carried on one of these cargo vessels in an asymmetric manner? So definitely something worth keeping an eye on and worth looking into. What I'm starting to realize is that the whole universe of strategic, i.e. nuclear warfare, the nukes are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of that whole arms race. It's more about intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, espionage, electronic warfare, cyber now. I mean, really, it might turn out that the only weapons that actually work when World War III really starts is the old school analog, is the oldest stuff that has the least amounts of electronic instrumentation and guidance systems, because that's the stuff that's not going to be fried by whatever EMP gets dropped. And this is what this could be a trial run for. Something to keep in mind. Where do we go next? Biden is planning on signing a decree aimed at strengthening sanctions against Moscow in the financial sector. And almost every bank around the world is given a choice between continuing to sell goods to the Russian military industrial complex or being tied to the U.S. financial system. So what this means is there's going to be more pressure on banks not to do business with the Russians, even though they'll find ways to circumvent those sanctions, as they have with the shadow fleets of tankers, as we've seen around the world. But the idea that the United States and Russia are becoming buddy-buddy and trying to find ways to negotiate a peace deal is very, very naive to believe what we're seeing is what's actually occurring. If anything, it's just them buying their time. Okay, the U.S. has yet to really fully mobilize militarily for some reason, and I do think the goal is to keep Ukraine at a stalemate, continuing to exploit their human resources, to throw them into the meat grinder, to try to gradually attrit the Russians without it escalating vertically. And then once Russia has been weakened enough, that's when we're going to go in there and do the big move. The problem is that many countries utilizing asymmetrical tactics like the Houthis have been doing are starting to stand up to the Americans. And this could very well be the death knell for not only the US dollar, but also the euro, who's now going to be forced to deindustrialize because the cost of importing their energy is going to become so incredibly high due not only to the struggles of the Panama Canal that are currently struggling with drought, but also now having to reroute all the way around Africa, which costs an incredible amount of money. It takes a lot longer. You got to pay people more, it takes more fuel and more insurance. And so it's just a bad state of affairs for the US dollar and the land that Russia has gained, and the demographic. You cannot go without saying that it's not just that Russia has won a conflict, because they have won a conflict. They've acquired a wealth of resources in the Donbass, in Crimea and southern Ukraine. They've acquired people in terms of the people that were living there, so a massive boost to their population. Okay, they've enhanced their ties with all of our adversaries, who, I mean, that's become abundantly clear, you know, with his visit to the Arab states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. They've enhanced their ties with the Chinese and the North Koreans. They basically decoupled, and their economy has proven to be robust. And in addition to that, they're more strategically positioned to take on NATO. I mean, Finland would have backed up the United States and NATO, whether they were in NATO or not. So it's kind of a moot point, but the idea that Finland is now going to open its military facilities directly to the United States, that is a massive escalation unto itself. China is also going to be beginning, very likely, nuclear testing very soon, and people are saying that there's some irregularities in their testing facility based on satellite data that suggests they might be getting ready to test a new type of nuclear weapon. Okay, and so things are just ramping up across the board. South Korea, Japan, and the United States are conducting nuclear drills on North Korea, while North Korea is saying that if you continue with these drills, we're going to nuke you, which I think is mostly just brinkmanship for the most part. But all it's going to take is one shot fired across the bow, and that is it. Russia has threatened to sever all ties with the U.S. if frozen assets are confiscated, as previously indicated. What that is really, you know, is Russia just going to forgo the loss and just say whatever? I don't know. But either way, that's not going to be good for the U.S. dollar. Because if you do that, then imagine how much faith people are going to lose in that dollar if they know that they can just get their assets confiscated, you know, at any point in time. The dollar is already slowly sliding, if you haven't realized it. And that's why the price of gold is going up. That's why the markets are going up, because the currency they're valued in is just that much weaker. Germany is closing 4 Russian consulates, including the oldest one, opened in 1783. The Russians insist that this was not their decision. That is Germany initiating this break. So what does that tell you? I mean, if they were truly, I mean, think about it. If people are saying that they're trying to bring Russia to the table now, why is Germany shutting down consulates? Why is Europe starting to increase their spending in the Ukraine war? Well, they're doing that to try to make up for the lack of defense spending now guaranteed by the United States while they deliberate that, which they eventually will likely get it, but it's just to keep morale high on the front line. The Ukrainians need to know that somebody has their back, or else they're just going to stop fighting. That's why Scholz stepped in. That's why the EU stepped in. When they did, they knew exactly, you know, what they were doing, because they probably understood that at some point the United States was going to start to wane in public support for the Ukraine war. So we're going to save this massive influx of EU support when it's needed. Okay, so I think that's what's happening. What the hell do I know? The girl, formerly girl guy, now a guy again, now referred to as S. Ashton Cirillo, who I think believes themselves more important than they actually are in the grand geopolitical scheme of things anyways, has confirmed that F-16s are going to be in Ukraine by the end of the year. She were the SBU spokesperson for some period of time. Again, if they're there, they were there a long time ago, unless you're really that dumb that you're just advertising stuff and then the Russians have to ask, well, why are they advertising this? Because if you're a military commander on the other side, you really got to wonder, like, is this a trick? Or are these people just that stupid that they're going to broadcast their plans to the world? And this would be a characteristic of somebody who was the top dog for way too long, who didn't have to ever think strategically because they had superior firepower. Everybody was scared of them. But now people are starting to fight back, which is all the more reason why all this stuff back here, you need to get some locked down while the getting is good. The Dutch are sending 18 American F-16 fighter jets. And if that's just the Dutch, you can bet that there's going to be a hell of a lot of warplanes. That is just, once they get their toes wet, they're going to jump all in eventually. They're going to fire every possible thing they can. And eventually, if they're launching these from NATO airstrips, one's going to get clipped, especially if the Russians start getting, pushed too far and start taking too heavily losses. Now, Poland is going to be changing its armed forces command structure so that it will be identical both in peacetime and wartime, which was not the case in the current legal framework. Now, this is very important. I was sent this email from a very reputable source who always brings me great intel. Thank you very much. You know who you are. They basically said that it is argued that such a change is needed because peacetime will convert to wartime gradually. What do they mean by that? So it's not just going to be we're at war. It's going to be an incremental move. It's called mission creep, right? So they're basically saying that now the command structure is going to be exactly the same. So there's going to be no need to transition. Basically saying that they want to get ready for war right now. Okay, so this is major, major, major stuff. Apparently, a lot of the polls said that if conscripted, like up to 80% have said if conscripted, they will not fight or won't be too happy to fight for this conflict. Zelensky and some of his advisors have also issued statements saying that they're now going to be making it a law, or at least trying to for the Ukrainian diaspora to have to report to embassies in whichever country they're currently in and come and fight and die for NATO, an organization that, again, does not recognize their existence and doesn't even consider them an ally, doesn't even want to bring them into the organization, won't even give them a date. They just say, win the war. Beat the guy with all the nuclear weapons that would completely, utterly destroy you if you actually beat them. I don't like those odds. Our Yemeni forces, according to the Houthi leader, this is what he says, any minute now we could see the shoot down of a U.S. military vessel. They're well within range of the Houthis' advanced anti-ship weapons that they probably got from who knows where. Iran, Russia, who knows at this point in time. They are saying that to defeat the invaders and the occupiers, and in the coming days, expect an unprecedented surprise in the dear history of Yemen. So they used, and think about those words he used, an unprecedented surprise in the history of Yemen. What could that possibly mean? They're not talking about the mobilization because they've already done that. So something else is going on. An Iranian surveillance ship in the southern Red Sea provides the Houthis with information on ship movements. Now this is major, and this is coming out of the Washington Post. So the reason why they're doing this is to incriminate the Iranians, which probably are, most definitely. I'm not denying that they're not likely involved in this, but that's a big association there. And guilt by association, of course, at times of war means that you are going to be party to the conflict, much like NATO is in Russia. Only Russia is acting strategically and not reacting. I can't say we will approach the matter with the same level of deliberation and sensitivity Now, what you see behind me is just, a video I've made on food storage before. It's a color coding system. Red is proteins, so that could be your beans, various protein powders, meats, freeze-dried meats. Yellow is things like macaroni, grain-based stuff like spaghetti, noodles, that sort of stuff. We have our Mountain House 25-year stuff, XMREs. You always want MREs because they're self-contained, everything you need to eat. You can get them in the MRE. You don't need to cook it or anything. There's a individual heating chemical heater inside. We have our things like salt, sugar in these blue bins. We also have some toiletries in there. In our white bins, we have the rice, because rice is just so important. It gets its own bin. In bins you can't see below here, the gray ones, I guess you can kind of see them. That's where we keep some of the drinks, the Arcopia, freeze-dried smoothies. Instant coffee is a big thing you want to stock because that's going to last forever. Coffee, I did a video once called 7 powders or 7 foods that are going to be worth more than gold. And we have cocoa, we have honey, we have instant coffee, salt, sugar, all the main core things, right? And even if you wanted to spice it up, spices, soy sauce is a great thing to store as well, just to give things a little bit of flavor. We have a green bucket over there that is for things like, not all junk food, but popcorns, things which are more appetizers. And then we have a black bin, which is more for just treats for the kids and things of that nature. It took a long time to build all this up, so don't go and do all this at once. There's plenty of options. Right now, I was having a talk with Sean James of My Self-Reliance today, and he was actually interviewing me about preparedness. I'm going to be interviewing him next week, and I tell you, that's one hell of a dude, man. Like, if there's somebody I would like to emulate in life, it's that guy. At least as far as what I know about him, based on the videos, just his mission to try to remain gray man and keep... It appears that he's making videos with his family and he's sharing a lot of his life, but he's also, he's a prepper, okay? And he's so serious of a prepper that he's went to the extent that he has in terms of, living off-grid, living that lifestyle away from all of the potential vulnerabilities that technology has to offer, as well as the conveniences, of course. But it's one of the things that I mentioned to him today was that, look, it's not about how much money you have. It really isn't, because when the shit hits the fan, doesn't matter if you're Mark Zuckerberg or whoever it is, what you're going to have is your skills, the people you can trust, and yeah, I mean, as much as those guys can fit in their bunker. But it doesn't matter rich or poor, okay, when the lights go out and all those zeros and ones on a screen never get turned on again, that's when it's going to be more about, what kind of person you are, what kind of physical fitness level you're at, what kind of skill sets do you have. But I would say this, there was maybe a time in the past, 5 years ago, where I would have said, build a long-term preparedness plan. And I still would say have those goals in the distance today, but I would say right now, that start with anything you possibly can. I don't care if it's a cheap $10 Rambo knife off of Amazon. If that's what you got to start with, that's something. It's better than nothing. And then you slowly build out to there. And the reason why I say that is because shit could hit the fan any day now. Literally any day now. And I wouldn't have always said that. I mean, I would have, but not to the DEFCON level that we're at today. Not even close. Like 5 years ago, yeah, I knew shit hit the fan was hypothetically possible, and we talked all about it, but there was never the imminence that there is now. Now, if you can't afford to stockpile all the stuff, and you can't afford the off-grid cabin in the woods, it's imperative that you first lock down your cheap, abundant source of food, simple water filtration. You get those two things, you're really halfway there. Then you make sure your medications are taken care of, your means of self-defense, and above and beyond that, though, if you can't even afford any of that, just get a simple bug-out bag put together. That's like really the first thing people should do. And the reason why you should do that is quite simple. The bug-out bag represents critical infrastructure. It's like your own mini critical infrastructure. What do you have in there? You have your waterworks system. your water filter system. You have your food system, that's your agriculture. You have your farmers. In your bug out bag, that's your emergency ration or whatever it is. You have your, maybe if you're, you know, a little bit more advanced, you have your portable power system, okay? And it's a microcosm, and it trains people to start to think about the things that they need in order to sustain life. So there's countless videos on this channel where we go into detail about that. Merry Christmas to anybody who you know, like myself, who actually celebrates it. And not necessarily from a die-hard religious point of view, but it's a great time to spend with family. I'll most likely see you before that time. I'll definitely see you on Christmas. I'll make a quick video, and on Boxing Day as well, most likely, with respect to what's going on at the store on that day. And it's going to be pretty big and substantial. If it's the final thing I do for the community, then so be it. I can die a happy man. What else do we got to talk about? We just got tons of videos coming down the pipeline, guys. Incredible guests on the channel. And I'm telling you, we all got to be together. And what I'm realizing is that some of the people I used to idolize, and I used to, you know, like talking with Sean today at My Self-Reliance, I was kind of starstruck a little bit, because I'm like, holy shit, like I've been watching this guy for years doing this stuff. And here I am, you know, being interviewed by him. It was just incredible. And but it got me thinking about how it doesn't matter, you know, how many subs you have. It doesn't matter how many, you know, people you know. We're all in this community together, and even the adjacent communities in YouTube are aware of each other's existence, is what I'm trying to say. Like, even though he wouldn't consider himself a prepping channel, we're still, you know, we're adjacent. And for that reason, it's great to see people coming together. And I think that in itself is a sign of where things are at. So on that note, I bid you farewell, good night, good luck. And don't forget, the strong survive and the prepared thrive. Take care. Canadian Prepper out.